As you saw in your programs, the title for today is Lessons Learned from Abigail. I know in the past that I have covered this story with you all. I know I did it in the biography series, but I wanted to revisit it today because it's one of my most favorite passages of Scripture because there's so much packed into it. As way of background for the story today, the story of Abigail, we're going to start in 1 Samuel 24. And what's happening at this time is David is on the run and hiding out in the desert. He's running from crazy King Saul, who had a history of being a little mentally unstable. And the reason that he's after David is basically he wants to kill him because he is jealous. He is jealous of David. And how this jealousy came about was that David went off to war against the Philistines. Saul was the king, we know that. First king of Israel. And as David came back victorious from the battle of the Philistines, the girls, the ladies, as the tradition was, would go out to sing to the troops as they returned. And the ladies, as David approached with his men, started singing a song loudly, and loudly enough that Saul could hear it. And part of the song went like this: Saul can kill his thousands, but David can kill 10,000. And the king did not like that because basically what they were saying was the king was a wimpy king. You know, David was the true hero, and there was something about the mental instability of Saul where he just went into such a rage over the statement in the song that he wanted David killed. Now David, I'm sorry, what? Girls. Yeah, girls. Girls caused it. Now at this point, David is not the king. Saul still is. He has been anointed by Samuel. You know the story where Jesse brought in all his sons, brought in the oldest, and Samuel goes, nope, it's not him. Works all the way down through all the sons that Jesse had, and he says, he's not here. Is there anybody else? And Jesse goes, well, yeah, I got the little guy out in the field tending sheep. And at that time, he was 10, 12 years old, maybe early teens. And Samuel says, bring him in. And when he saw David, as unlikely the pick was, especially to Dad Jesse, that was the king, the future king to take the place of Saul one day. And at this point of the story of Abigail, David is probably in his 20s because we know at age 30 he actually took the throne and became king. So at this point he's somewhere probably in his 20s. And at this point, David has to be thinking, you know, I was anointed, chosen by God at a young age, and at this point, this king thing is not all it's cracked up to be. David had escaped into the desert to hide from King Saul and his armies. Now please remember, he is in the desert. At that time, they did not have showers or laundromats or air-conditioned pop-up trailers or right guard. So he's there with his little ragtag army of somewhere between 400 to 600 men with not a whole lot to do but hang out in the desert. Now, I'd have to say I would not want to be downwind at night around the campfire with these guys. And to kind of thicken the plot on all this, please remember that Saul was David's father-in-law. You remember that? Because David went up against Goliath. He got the king's daughter. But in order to shame David even more, he took David's wife away from him and gave it to another man. So here it is. David is alone, no wife, in the desert with 400 to 600 stinky men. Now the story of Abigail is found in 1 Samuel 25. Now on the either side of 1 Samuel 25, we have 1 Samuel 24, and after it we have 1 Samuel 26. So you're sitting there looking at me thinking, well, wow, that's profound stuff right there. But the story of Abigail is sandwiched within 2 chapters where David has the chance to kill Saul. And for some reason, he doesn't. Now, you all know the pit stop story. That's in 1 Samuel 24. I call it the pit stop story, and we'll kind of refresh your memory here. After Saul returned from pursuing the Philistines, he was told David is in the desert. So somebody spied David in the desert, and he goes out to go find him. And it says he came to the sheep pens along the way. And as luck would have it, nature called. Now, they didn't have rest stops or McDonald's in those days. So what you did was just find a private area. And he found one by the sheep pens. Maybe that's why he picked the sheep pens, because it was already kind of smelly. But anyway, he went to a cave there to relieve himself. Now, what he doesn't realize is in the cave that he picked, David's hiding in the back with some of his men. Saul has no clue. So as he laid his robe aside, David decides to pull a prank on the king. And he takes his sword and cuts the rear end out of the king's robes, unbeknownst to King Saul. So after King Saul finishes, he puts his robe back on, exits the cave, only now his robe is Daisy Duke style, where his royal glory is there for everybody to see, shall we say. Now, David feels sorry after doing this. He thought it was funny to play a joke on the king at first. And then Saul realizes what has happened and realizes that there's no backside in his robe anymore. And David, oh man, I shouldn't have done that. I thought it was funny, but you are Saul. You are the anointed king of Israel. And he, felt sorry about doing it. But the point is, David was so close to King David at that point, he could have killed him. He had the chance right there. Saul by himself, David and his men hidden in the cave, and he chose not to take the king's life. Now in chapter 26, he has another chance. He has another chance to kill the king, and again they're out in the desert. And Saul falls asleep at night with his general Abner and the men circled all around. But the story goes that the Lord put a deep sleep on Saul. He was out. And David, I call this the igloo cooler and the rifle story. King Saul is there asleep with his water jug and his sword by his head. So David sneaks in and swipes his water jug and his sword, runs off with it, and it goes up on the next hill while everybody's asleep and starts yelling, "Hey! Hey! Over here! Over here!" And they wake up and it's like, who is this crazy guy yelling at us at 2 a.m? And then they realize it's David, who again has pranked the king and walked off with his stuff. But the point is, again, here is a chance to kill Saul. He's asleep. His general's asleep. His men are asleep. Another opportunity to take the king's life, and he doesn't do it. Now, I mentioned he's in his 20s at this point, but at this time, he seems more like a bad teenager, pulling pranks on people. This is the king, and he's pulling jokes on him. So, he has a way to go before he becomes the king. He needs to mature. God knows when it's time, doesn't he? He knows when it's time for a lot of things. Well, he realizes at this point there is something yet missing in David. He needs a little work. And that's where the story of Abigail comes in. In chapter 25, I'll just start. Now Samuel died, and all Israel assembled and mourned for him, and they buried him at his home in Ramah. Now, why would they put that particular verse there? At the beginning of the story, it says Samuel has passed away. Why? Was he not David's mentor? Was he not the one that had anointed him to be the chosen king of Israel? And now he's gone. David doesn't have that support or that lifeline, that connection anymore. He's gone. Then David moved down into the desert of Maon. And there was a certain man in Maon who had property there at Carmel and was very wealthy. He wasn't worthy, he was wealthy. We'll get into the not worthy part here in just a minute. But he was very wealthy, and at that time, one's wealth was measured by livestock and such, rather than your bank account. And it said he had 1,000 goats. Wow. And 3,000 sheep, which he was shearing in Carmel. His name was Nabal, which translates to stupid. Now, I just can't imagine a mom looking at her new baby boy and naming him stupid or dummy, whatever I don't know if that was actually his name, or, sometimes people will have nicknames for people that they call them behind them back. Whether that was his actual name or a nickname that he was referred to, I don't know. But we'll just go with the name of Nabal, which means stupid, and he was. Now, his wife's name was Abigail, and she was the exact opposite of Nabal. She was intelligent and beautiful and very nice. But her husband, a Calebite, was surly and mean in his dealings. So here it is, a rich, nasty man with a beautiful and kind wife. Isn't that always the way? Well, it still happens today. Yeah. While David was in the desert, he heard that Nabal was shearing sheep. So he sent 10 young men and said to them, "Go up to Nabal at Carmel and greet him in my name, and say to him, 'Long life to you, good health to you and your household, and good health to all that is yours.'" Did you catch that? David sends 6 men to Nabal's house because it's sheep shearing time. Now what does that mean? Ching ching. Yeah. Yeah, money is flowing. It's time of celebration. This guy's got plenty of sheep and goats and stuff, and they're getting ready to sell the wool to spin into garments, or whatever they did with the wool at that time. And it said he had, 1,000 sheep? So he's got lots of fur. So David sends his men to greet him and, be very nice, be very cordial. But we'll see what David was getting at here. Now, I hear that it's sheep shearing time. And when the shepherds, Nabal's shepherds, were with us, we did not mistreat them. So David's army did not mistreat the shepherds. Now, why do you think that was? Do you think that David maybe had a soft spot in his heart for shepherds? Because he were one, right? He were one. We did not mistreat them, and the whole time they were at Carmel, nothing of theirs was missing. We didn't touch their stuff. We guarded them so nobody else, vandals in the desert, would not touch their stuff. Ask your own servants, and they will tell you. Therefore be favorable toward my young men, since we come at a festive time. Please give your servants and your son whatever you can find for them. David asked his men to say, we guarded your men, we kept them from harm. We weren't under contract. We did not have to do this. We're not being paid. But if you could be so kind, anything that you could give us for our efforts would be most appreciated. Because they're stuck out in the desert. How are they going to get supplies? Things might have been running pretty low. And when David's men arrived, David rehearsed them into what to say, how to say it. When David's men arrived, they gave Nabal this message in David's name, and then they waited. Waited to see what Nabal was going to say back. And he answered David's servants and said, "Who is this David? I don't know who you're talking about. Who is this son of Jesse? What? Many servants are breaking away from their masters these days. How would I know that this guy's who you say? Maybe he's just ran away from his master and he's hiding out in the desert. It didn't seem very kingly to Nabal either that an anointed king would be hiding behind a rock. Many servants are breaking away from their masters these days. Why should I take my bread and my water and the meat I have slaughtered for my shearers and give it to men coming from who knows where? So David's men turned around and went back to David. And when they arrived, they reported every word. And David said to his men, "Put on your guns, boys. We're going to town. We ride at dawn." Well, they didn't have guns, but he said, "Put on your swords." That was their way of packing heat back in the time. So they put on their swords, and David put on his. He says, "I'm not sending just a few of you. I am going with you." Seems like David had a temper. A little bit, you think? About 400 men went up with David while the 200 stayed with the supply. So 600 guys. So 200 of them stayed back to guard what they had left, and 400 more went with David to descend upon Nabal and his household. So somehow one of the servants gets wind of this. One of the servants told Nabal's wife, Abigail, "David sent messengers from the desert to give our master his greetings." And I can just hear the servant saying, "This is not good. This is not good," because the servant knew who David was. He knew his reputation as anointed king of Israel and mighty warrior, a warrior king. But he hurled insults at them. "Your stupid husband Nabal," he didn't say it in that manner, but that's what he meant, hurled insults at them. "Yet these men were very good to us." His men did exactly what they claimed. They did not mistreat us, and the whole time we were out in the fields near them, nothing was missing. None of our stuff, none of Nabal's sheep, nothing. They guarded us even though they didn't have to. Night and day, they were a wall around us all the time we were herding our sheep near them. Now think it over and see what you can do, because disaster is hanging over our master and his whole household. He is such a wicked man that no one can talk to him. Servant says, we throw our hands up. Now if we go to try to talk to him and tell him what's about to happen, he's not going to believe us. So maybe you, Abigail, since you're his wife, maybe you can talk some sense into this guy. Abigail lost no time. She took 200 loaves of bread. Wow. I mean, evidently they were there baked. Can you imagine the size of his estate with all of the people that worked for him? Just happened to have 200 loaves of bread, 2 skins of wine, 5 dressed sheep, 5 bushels of roasted grain, 100 cakes of raisins, and 200 cakes of pressed figs, and loaded them on donkeys. I am here to tell you that is the largest to-go order ever recorded in the Bible. And we have a depiction up here of what that might have looked like. I mean, that had to be several donkeys that they loaded up with all this stuff. So Abigail orders right away, stow and go. Let's get on the road with this stuff and meet David, and maybe we can stop something bad from happening. Then she told her servants, go on ahead. Maybe when he sees all this stuff, he will back down. I will follow you. But she didn't tell her husband what she was doing, did she? Why? She probably just didn't want to listen to him. She knew he'd be mad, worse than mad. So she took it on herself to try to fix the situation. And David is hot on the road. Now, why was David so mad? Tell me again why he is so mad. Yes. He was God's anointed. He was a musician, a shepherd. The Bible identifies him as a man after God's own heart. But he was also impulsive and had a hair trigger. And that's evident of other stories we read about in his life, even later on. What David was suffering at this point was a very bad case of bruised ego. Now, what was David guilty of? I'm sorry, not David, Nabal. What was he guilty of? Being greedy, being selfish, rudeness, and stupidity. Now, are those offenses that are punishable in a court of law today? Well, if it were true, we would all be there. Officer, arrest that man and shoot him because he is rude and stupid. Another question. Why did David spare the life of Saul in the chapters before and after this account? When Saul was openly trying to kill him? Aren't there some similarities between the personalities of Saul and Nabal? Think about it. Those two men had similar traits. So why the difference in how he viewed them from David? The answer? David considered Saul his superior because he was the anointed king, while Nabal was inferior because he wasn't. Verse 20 of Samuel 25, as she came riding on her donkey into a mountain ravine, there was David and his men ascending to her. And she met them. And David had just said, it's been useless, all my watching over this fellow's property in the desert so that nothing of his was missing. He has paid me back evil for good. May God deal with David, be it ever so severely, if by morning I leave alive one male and all of those who belong to him. I mean, David is majorly ticked off. And yeah, he's going to show him. He's going to kill his servants and his shepherds, and all those other unarmed people. Boy, that'll show him. When Abigail saw David, she quickly got off her donkey and bowed down before David with her face to the ground. She fell at his feet and she said, my Lord, let the blame be on me alone. Please let your servant speak. Do you hear what your servant has to say? There she is, face to face with David. 400 men with drawn swords and an unarmed lady on a donkey is in their midst. And she had to know which one was David. I think it was probably evident because he probably was first in line in the front to deal with this. There is a song, a contemporary Christian song called Turn. Some of you may know it. But there's a few words in that song that hit right upon what's going on here. It says, how can you expect people in their right minds to not see between the cracks and notice that there's something missing? Abigail was looking between the cracks of David and realized something was missing. My commentary, my Bible says Abigail shows concern for the preservation of David's integrity in view of the office that he was later to assume. She says, verse 25, may my Lord pay no attention to that wicked man Nabal. He is just like his name, and his name is fool. And folly goes with him. But as for me, your servant, I did not see the men my master sent. If I had, it would have been a different story if they had come to me instead. Now since the Lord has kept you, my master, from bloodshed and from avenging yourself with your own hands, as surely as the Lord lives and as you live, may your enemies and all who intend to harm my master be like Nabal. And let this gift which your servant has brought to my master be given to the men who follow you. What is she saying here? Don't do stupid. It's not just David in an angry fit here. If he goes through with what he is vowing to go through with, history would not be the same. Innocent bloodshed of who knows how many people because of what? A hurt ego. A childish emotion. Please forgive your servant's offense, for the Lord will certainly make a lasting dynasty for my master. How does she know that? She says, David, the Lord has in mind that your kingdom will go forever and ever. Do you not realize the importance of being anointed king of Israel? And it's just not Israel, David. It is the destiny of mankind that will come through you. Because he fights the Lord's battles. Let no wrongdoing be found in you as long as you live. Even though someone is pursuing you to take your life, she knew that Saul was chasing David. She said, even though he is trying to kill you, the life of my master will be bound securely in the bundle of the living by the Lord your God. She says, David, God has your back. Don't you be fighting his battles. Don't you be all proud and uppity and taking things into your own hand. By the lives of your enemies he will hurl away as from the pocket of a sling. A sling. David knew about slings, didn't he? He used a sling against Goliath. He knew how to shoot a sling. She goes, you think about that sling, David. He's going to take away everything bad. When the Lord has done for my master every good thing he promised concerning him and has appointed him leader over Israel, my master will not have on his conscience the staggering burden of needless bloodshed or of having avenged himself. It will haunt you for the rest of your life, David. Needless bloodshed. And when the Lord has brought my master success, please remember your servant. Remember me. I would have loved to have been there when she delivered this message to David. David, the mighty warrior, the mighty soldier with his sword, 500 guys behind him with their swords. And here it is, an unarmed girl on a donkey that talks some sense into him. You know, and I just can imagine when he first saw her coming through, you know, he may have thought it was a trick. You know, here comes a girl on a donkey to be followed by, you know, Saul in his arm. I mean, he didn't know. Because they're in a ravine, they're in a rocky area. They don't know what's coming behind her. And they realize it is just Abigail that came with a message. How can you read that or listen to that and not realize that that was a message from God himself through this lady? And as David realized that, the sword of his men's sword, dropped. And I think the head of David did too in shame. Why? Because she was right. She was right. She was looking through his cracks and she knew exactly what was missing in his character. This young man in his 20s that would someday be king. She realized that David was only living in the here and now, and he was smashing a fly with a 2-ton bomb. Now, who is the real dummy in this story? Is it Nabal or is it David? The one that didn't want to part with his food or drink, or the one that would tarnish his future kingship with blood? And David spoke to Abigail. Verse 32, he said to Abigail, "Praise be to the Lord of God of Israel, who has sent you today to meet me." I bet he was silent for a few minutes before he got that out. And I think his tone changed, don't you? The anger left. The hurt left. That bruised ego didn't mean so much anymore. May you be blessed for your good judgment and for keeping me from bloodshed this day and from avenging myself with my own hands. Otherwise, as surely as the Lord, the God of Israel, lives, you have kept me from harming you. If you had not come quickly to meet, not one male belonging to Nabal would have been left alive by morning. Then David accepted from her hand what she had brought and said, "Go home in peace. Go home in peace. I am so sorry. I will not be there to attack your household. I have heard your words and granted your request. I'm sorry, man. Nothing to see here, just go home." So Abigail goes home and she tells Nabal what she did. Well, actually, she didn't. Not first time around. It's party time at the Nabal house, and he, lingered a little too long with the goat skins full of wine, and he is blasted. So she says, "I'll tell him the next morning, If I tell him now, he's not going to remember." So the next day, once he sobered up, she told him what happened. And his heart failed him, and he became like a stone. Sounds like he had a heart attack. And about 10 days later, he died. He died. Lessons learned from Abigail. What lessons can we learn from that story? Number one, you can't take it with you. Not one goat, not one sheep, not one raisin cake could Nabal take with him. All the fortune he amassed, he's out, he's gone. And it's kind of ironic that what sent him out was the loss of it, or part of it. I'm sure he had plenty more. Second lesson we can learn from Abigail. Wisdom is not gender specific. Well, point well taken. But here was the anointed king, a male, and please remember this was 3,000 years ago? Culture was a little bit different. It was different then with women. But when David heard her speak, Abigail, it didn't come from a guy. It wasn't his army, his men saying, "No, David, I think this is stupid. Just cool down, just chill." It wasn't the men telling him, because they probably knew this was wrong. I would bet they did. But it had to come from a girl. David didn't say, "Well, what do you know? You're just a girl." What she said went straight to his heart. What else can we learn about this story? We gain a lot of insight into the personality of David. There is more written about David than anybody else in the Bible, New and Old Testament. We see a lot about David, and a lot of it is not good. He did stupid, more than this. But God labels him as a man after his own heart. Isn't that amazing? Number 4. Very important. When you fight your battles, don't forget to invite the Lord. That was something David forgot. He kind of overlooked that little fact. Number 5. Where there is discernment, wisdom is rewarded with relief from above. Where there is discernment, wisdom is rewarded with relief from above. Help. I'll say help from above. It was a relief in this situation. It took a lot of courage to do what that girl did. She was one brave girl, but you know, she was backed up. She had a lot of wisdom, a lot of discernment, but God was helping her. I'd like to end the sermon today with a story about a little boy and a little girl. And they're out playing in the snow, and the little boy gets this big idea, and he challenges the little girl to a contest. He said, let's both pick a tree. And the contest will be, we're going to walk toward our tree, and whoever does the best job of getting there is going to win. So she says, okay. So they both pick their tree. Now she picks her tree, and she starts toward the tree in a straight line. She never takes her eye off that tree. Now the little boy, I guess maybe he was ADHD, I don't know. But he picked his tree, and he'd go a little way, and then he'd turn around to see, well, I'm doing pretty good. Then he'd start again, get a few more steps. Yeah, okay. Well, he kind of wandered away from the tree because he kept turning around and not looking at it. So they finally get to the respective trees, and he's zigzagged all over the place, but the girl's path is straight. He said, how did you do that? She said, well, I kept my eye on the tree, and I didn't turn around like you did and keep zigzagging all over the place. So that's why mine is straight and I win. David is the little boy. Abigail is the little girl. The important thing to remember is they both made it to the tree. They just took different routes. This is a perfect picture of the Christian life. If we fix the eyes of our hope and trust and our faith upon Jesus and keep them continually fastened thereon, we will be like Abigail and receive immortal victory as our reward. But you know what? David will too. 2 different personalities, but the same reward awaits for both. Amen.